Russia's involvement in the Middle East, particularly its alliance with Iran, is driven by long-term strategic goals aimed at counterbalancing Western influence, ensuring regional stability on its terms, and safeguarding its geopolitical interests. The relationship between Moscow and Tehran has deepened significantly over the last decade, particularly after Western sanctions isolated both nations and forced them to find mutual economic and military benefits. Iran is more than just a regional partner to Russia. It is a critical node in Moscow's vision of a multipolar world where U.S. hegemony is challenged and regional powers collaborate to secure independent spheres of influence. One of the primary reasons for Russia's support of Iran is strategic geography. Iran sits at a vital intersection between Central Asia, the Caucasus, and the Persian Gulf. It offers Russia access to the Middle East without relying on Turkey or Western-aligned Gulf states. For decades, Russia has tried to project power southward, and Iran provides a stable route for that influence. The Caspian Sea, which both countries border, further deepens their interconnected economic and security interests. Iran's location also makes it a valuable ally for Russia in ensuring the security of energy corridors and trade routes by passing Western-dominated waters. Military cooperation between Russia and Iran is another key element in their relationship. Since the Syrian civil war, the two nations have aligned their military objectives to support the Assad regime and push back against Western and Sunni Arab-backed rebel groups. The collaboration in Syria demonstrated Russia's willingness to coordinate directly with Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, and its regional proxies such as Hezbollah. The effectiveness of their joint operations in Syria showed the West that Russia and Iran could coordinate regional interventions with considerable success, and that they were willing to use hard power to defend their mutual allies. In the realm of defense technology, Russia has supplied Iran with advanced weapons systems despite international objections. The delivery of the S-300 air defense system and the potential for more advanced systems like the S-400 or even fighter jets such as the 35 underlines a growing military alliance. For Russia, arming Iran serves multiple purposes. It boosts its defense industry, creates a buffer against Western-aligned military forces in the Gulf, and makes any American or Israeli attack on Iran more difficult and risky. Economic relations, though hampered by sanctions, are also expanding. Both countries have sought to reduce their dependence on the US dollar, signing agreements to trade in their own currencies and exploring new banking systems to bypass Western financial restrictions. Russia has also shown interest in investing in Iran's energy infrastructure and transportation projects, particularly those aligned with China's Belt and Road Initiative. By doing so, Moscow reinforces a trilateral Eurasian alliance that can challenge the West's economic dominance. Diplomatically, Russia often positions itself as a mediator between Iran and the West while quietly supporting Iran's resistance posture. Moscow benefits from the ongoing tension between Iran and the US, as it keeps Washington's attention divided and limits American capacity to project power in Eastern Europe and Central Asia. Russian diplomats have used platforms like the UN Security Council and various multilateral forums to defend Iran's right to nuclear development under the JCPOA and criticize American unilateral sanctions. The Ukraine war has further deepened Russia-Iran ties. As Russia faces isolation from the West, it has turned to Iran for military supplies, particularly drones, which have reportedly been used in Ukraine. This emerging reverse dependency shows the shifting dynamics of their alliance. Iran is no longer just the junior partner, but an essential contributor to Russia's current war effort. In return, Russia has likely promised more military support and diplomatic backing for Iran in future confrontations with Israel or the US. As tensions rise between Iran and Israel, especially in the context of broader Middle Eastern instability, Russia finds itself in a delicate but powerful position. Moscow would prefer to avoid a full-scale war that could draw it into direct conflict with the US, but it is also unlikely to abandon Iran if Washington decides to escalate militarily. Any aggressive Western intervention in Iran would directly challenge Russia's credibility and influence, forcing Putin to respond. either through arms sales, proxy coordination, or diplomatic retaliation. In that context, Iran becomes not just an ally, but a frontline in Russia's broader battle against American supremacy. Donald Trump's potential return to the political arena, particularly in the context of escalating tensions in the Middle East, has reignited concerns over a more aggressive and confrontational U.S. foreign policy. His previous term as president was marked by a sharp departure from traditional diplomacy with a focus on unilateral actions, maximum pressure campaigns, and a disregard for multilateral agreements. Now, as global tensions rise between the United States, Iran, Israel, and Russia, the rhetoric and strategies associated with Trump's leadership style have once again become a focal point of international concern. His history with Iran and the Middle East suggests that a renewed Trump presence could lead to dangerous escalations. Trump's most controversial and consequential decision in the Middle East was the unilateral withdrawal from the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action JCPOA, also known as the Iran nuclear deal, in 2018, despite international opposition and Iran's compliance with the agreement at the time. Trump dismantled a key diplomatic achievement of the Obama administration. Instead, he imposed severe economic sanctions on Iran under the maximum pressure policy, aiming to cripple its economy and force its leadership to capitulate to American demands. This move not only isolated the United States diplomatically, but also pushed Iran to resume uranium enrichment, undermining global non-proliferation efforts and creating a pathway toward potential conflict. Trump's foreign policy was shaped more by transactional thinking and optics than long-term strategy. His administration frequently resorted to threats of military action and economic coercion. One of the most dramatic examples of this was the targeted assassination of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani in January 2020. This high-stakes act brought the U.S. and Iran to the brink of open war, with retaliatory missile strikes by Iran and heightened military alertness across the region. While Trump claimed this action was meant to deter Iranian aggression, it instead deepened hostilities and destabilized an already fragile balance. Trump's rhetoric throughout his presidency consistently favored militaristic posturing. He often spoke about obliterating adversaries and used language that made diplomacy nearly impossible. Such statements were not just aimed at Iran, but also extended to North Korea, Venezuela, and even NATO allies. In the context of Iran, this aggressive tone discouraged any serious diplomatic dialogue and emboldened hardliners within Iran who used Trump's words to justify anti-American sentiment and reject negotiations. Trump's polarizing style turned foreign policy into a performance of strength, which appealed to his political base but alienated allies and inflamed tensions globally. In the current environment, where the possibility of a broader Middle Eastern war looms due to escalating Israel-Iran hostilities, Trump's re-entry into American politics could act as an accelerant. Whether as president or as a major political influencer, his backing of aggressive military responses and harsh sanctions would likely push the U.S. closer to direct conflict. Trump's support for Israel is unconditional, and he would almost certainly give full military and political backing to any Israeli campaign against Iran. This could provoke not only Iranian retaliation, but also a broader regional war involving Hezbollah, Syrian militias, and possibly even Russia. Trump's return would also complicate relations with key global powers. His disdain for NATO, rejection of multilateral institutions, and transactional approach to diplomacy weaken the U.S. position in building coalitions or resolving crises through international consensus. In a scenario where the U.S. launches strikes against Iran, a Trump-led or Trump-influenced administration would likely act unilaterally, bypassing diplomatic channels and ignoring allied concerns. This could push rivals like Russia and China to side more overtly with Iran, turning a regional conflict into a wider geopolitical confrontation. Domestically, Trump's rhetoric has also served to polarize public opinion on foreign policy, framing any diplomatic engagement as weakness and any military action as strength. This black and white worldview undermines nuanced policy making and increases the risk of rash decisions in a complex region. If political pressures or international incidents escalate, Trump's tendency to use foreign policy as a tool for domestic political gain could lead to dramatic and dangerous escalations, especially if he believes a war would rally national support. In summary, Trump's return and his historical approach to Iran and Middle Eastern affairs represent a clear threat to regional stability. His preference for force over diplomacy, his erratic and provocative rhetoric, and his rejection of international norms all point to a future where conflict is more likely than resolution. As global tensions mount and the potential for war between Israel and Iran becomes more realistic, Trump's influence could once again transform a simmering crisis into a full-scale geopolitical disaster. Israel's position in the Middle East has long made it a geopolitical flashpoint, but in recent years, its role has evolved into something even more volatile. A potential battleground for a proxy war between global superpowers. As tensions escalate between Iran and Israel, the involvement of external powers like the United States and Russia has transformed regional rivalries into global concerns. What happens in Israel no longer stays confined to its borders. It has the potential to trigger responses from Washington, Moscow, and even Beijing. The struggle for influence in the Middle East, coupled with overlapping alliances and mutual hostilities, makes Israel the most likely epicenter for a larger clash between rival superpowers. The core of this dynamic lies in Israel's alliance with the United States and its adversarial relationship with Iran, a key strategic partner of Russia. The US has long provided Israel with military aid, intelligence cooperation, and diplomatic backing at the United Nations. This support has only increased in recent years, especially under administrations that view Israel not only as an ally but also as a frontline partner in countering Iran's regional ambitions. Israel's repeated airstrikes on Iranian targets in Syria, cyber attacks against Iranian infrastructure, and threats to preemptively strike Iran's nuclear facilities are often perceived in Tehran as extensions of American policy. On the other hand, Iran has found in Russia a powerful counterweight to US influence. The Russian-Iranian partnership, while not without tensions, is built on shared interests, resisting American dominance, supporting the Assad regime in Syria, and maintaining leverage over global energy markets. Russia has provided Iran with advanced weapons systems and diplomatic cover, particularly in the UN Security Council. In Syria, Russian and Iranian forces have coordinated military operations, and both see the survival of the Assad regime as a strategic necessity. Any Israeli action against Iranian assets in Syria or Lebanon risks a reaction not just from Tehran but from Moscow, especially if Russian personnel or infrastructure are impacted. What makes Israel a particularly dangerous flashpoint is that it sits at the intersection of so many strategic imperatives. For the United States, defending Israel is not just about protecting an ally, it is about maintaining credibility in the region, securing access to intelligence and military infrastructure, and sending a message to adversaries like Iran, Russia, and China. For Russia, challenging Israel's freedom to operate militarily in Syria or the wider region can serve as a way to test US resolve, expand its own influence, and support its Iranian ally. These overlapping ambitions create a high-stakes environment where any miscalculation can escalate quickly. Hezbollah, the Iranian-backed militia in Lebanon, adds another layer of complexity. With an arsenal reportedly containing over 100,000 rockets, Hezbollah poses a credible threat to Israel's northern border. Any Israeli strike on Iran, especially on its nuclear facilities, could trigger a multi-front war involving Hezbollah, Iranian forces in Syria, and potentially even direct retaliation from Iran itself. If such a scenario unfolds, the US would almost certainly be drawn in to defend Israel, while Russia could escalate support for its allies, potentially including deploying advanced weapons or enforcing no-fly zones in parts of Syria. The growing cooperation between Israel and Arab nations under the Abraham Accords also risks provoking further regional tensions. While this normalization of ties between Israel and countries like the UAE, Bahrain, and Saudi Arabia strengthens the anti-Iran axis, it also reinforces the perception in Tehran and by extension in Moscow that a US-backed alliance is encircling Iran. Russia may respond to this by deepening military cooperation with Iran or increasing its presence in regional hotspots like the Persian Gulf or Eastern Mediterranean. Cyber warfare and misinformation also play a significant role in this evolving conflict. Both Russia and the United States have invested heavily in cyber capabilities, and Israel and Iran are already engaged in frequent cyber skirmishes. In a full-scale conflict, this digital front could expand dramatically, involving global infrastructure, energy supplies, and financial systems. A cyber attack blamed on one side could rapidly spiral into kinetic warfare, with both superpowers forced to respond. In the current climate, where tensions are already high due to the war in Ukraine, NATO expansion, and growing US-China rivalry, Israel's actions, or Iran's response, could act as a trigger for a much larger confrontation. The world is not facing a Cold War-style standoff, but a fluid and dangerously interconnected series of conflicts. In such a scenario, Israel is not just a regional actor, it is the stage where global rivalries may explode. The choice is made in Tel Aviv, Tehran, Washington, or Moscow could very well determine whether the world inches closer to widespread conflict or pulls back from the brink. The current global climate is marked by a convergence of crises that raise serious concerns about the possibility of a larger war. Rising tensions between superpowers, regional rivalries, proxy conflicts, and a breakdown in diplomatic norms all contribute to a precarious international landscape. The friction points, from Ukraine and Taiwan to the Middle East, are not isolated incidents but interconnected flashpoints that reflect a deeper erosion of the post-World War II global order. In this volatile atmosphere, the question arises, is a larger war unavoidable? One of the primary drivers of this escalating tension is the renewed strategic competition between the United States, Russia, and China. The U.S. Russia conflict has intensified with the war in Ukraine, where the West has backed Kyiv through massive military aid, sanctions, and intelligence support. Russia, feeling increasingly cornered, has framed its actions as defensive measures against NATO expansion and Western encroachment. The rhetoric has grown more aggressive, with threats of nuclear escalation resurfacing in ways not seen since the Cold War. Meanwhile, China's assertiveness in the Asia-Pacific, particularly over Taiwan and the South China Sea, brings another major front into focus. The U.S. commitment to defend Taiwan and its increasing military presence in the region make the Indo-Pacific another area where war could break out. In the Middle East, the conflict between Israel and Iran has escalated into a shadow war involving cyber attacks, assassinations, drone strikes, and proxy battles in Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. As Iran moves closer to nuclear weapons capability and Israel vows never to allow it, the likelihood of a direct military confrontation increases. This potential conflict would not remain limited to the region. The United States would almost certainly come to Israel's defense, while Russia, which has aligned closely with Iran in Syria and other regional matters, might respond diplomatically or militarily. In such a scenario, a localized strike could quickly expand into a wider war involving global powers. Compounding these tensions is the weakening of global institutions that were designed to prevent such escalations. The United Nations, once a platform for diplomacy and de-escalation, is increasingly paralyzed by veto power deadlocks in the Security Council. Arms control agreements, such as the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty and Open Skies Treaty, have collapsed. Trust between nations has eroded, and back-channel communications that once kept crises in check have diminished. In an age of disinformation, cyber warfare, and rapid escalation, misunderstandings or false flag operations could lead to unintended consequences that spiral out of control. Nuclear proliferation is another key concern. As major powers modernize their arsenals, the threshold for the use of nuclear weapons becomes more ambiguous. Tactical nuclear weapons, once seen as unthinkable, are now openly discussed as viable options in limited conflicts. This normalization of nuclear language, especially from Russian officials during the Ukraine war, signals a dangerous shift in strategic thinking. Other nations may follow suit, believing that nuclear deterrence provides security or leverage, and thereby increasing the overall risk of a nuclear confrontation. The economic dimension also plays a significant role in the march toward conflict. Sanctions, trade wars, and supply chain disruptions have weaponized economic tools. Countries are decoupling from global trade systems, forming rival economic blocs. and stockpiling resources. Economic pressure often precedes military action, and as nations face internal crises, from inflation and energy shortages to civil unrest, they may turn to external enemies as a distraction or rallying point. History has shown that economic desperation can be a powerful motivator for war. Public opinion and political polarization further complicate matters. In many countries, including democracies, nationalist and populist rhetoric is on the rise. Leaders who promise strength, retaliation, and pride over diplomacy gain political support. This shift creates an environment where calls for de-escalation are seen as weakness and hawkish policies become popular. The social media age amplifies conflict narratives, spreads misinformation, and fosters a constant state of outrage, making calm, strategic decision-making more difficult for leaders under pressure. Despite all this, war is not inevitable. History is full of moments where the world stood on the edge but pulled back. Cuban Missile Crisis, Berlin blockade, and various Middle East standoffs. The key difference now is the multiplicity of simultaneous crises and the reduced number of functioning diplomatic safeguards. Avoiding a larger war requires urgent re-engagement in dialogue, the rebuilding of international trust, and the revival of institutions that can mediate conflict. In conclusion, the world is undeniably on the brink. While a larger war isn't guaranteed, the current trajectory suggests that without deliberate collective efforts to de-escalate tensions and rebuild global stability, the chances of a catastrophic conflict increase each day. The time to act is now, before miscalculation becomes tragedy.